Exodus 22:1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or donkey or sheep, he shall restore double. And so these regulations here that we're into now, they're dealing with theft of animals, which is expanding now here on the 8th commandment of God. You don't steal, or thou shalt not steal. But if a person stole and then killed or sold someone's ox or sheep, he must compensate for it. It's got to be paid for. He's got to compensate for it by returning the same kinds of animals. But we see 5 head of cattle had to be paid for the loss for 1 ox, and 4 sheep for the loss of 1 sheep. Obviously, this bit of a heavy compensation was to be a great deterrent for animal theft. If you know of rules like this, hey, I steal a sheep, I may have to pay it back 4 times. That's a good deterrent. Don't do this, right? That's what any law should be in place for. It should come with a punishment for the crime. If the stolen animal was still alive, the compensation was less, but still costly. As verse 4 says, if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's an ox or donkey or sheep, he shall restore double. Now, there's a lot of talk today. I see it out there in the news and what all. There's a lot of talk today surrounding gun ownership and burglary and what happens if you shoot a burglar. And as far as I know, as from what I remember, all the rules change a lot when the sun goes down. When it gets dark outside, a lot of different things come into play. And so, same here in the Bible. If a thief committed burglary at night and was killed by the owner of the house, then the defendant was not guilty of murder. That's what it says. But if the burglar was killed in the daytime, then the homeowner was guilty of homicide. Different from what we're thinking of, isn't it? Okay? This is what we see right here. We see it says in verse 3, if the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. So apparently during the daytime the thief could be seen, and so you'd figure a little more help could have been gotten, I guess is kind of the way of it. Apparently these rules worked to protect human life, even the lives of criminals. You know, I want to think anybody breaks in my house any time of day, I'm going to shoot him. That's what a lot of people in Texas thinks, right? God's telling the Israelite people it's a big difference if it's daytime or night. Okay? But they're working to protect human life, even the life of a criminal. Now, let's pause for a second and wait. In my life of sin, when I was against God, in my hostility, I was the criminal. I was the guy that stole. I was the guy that did wrong. And I'm glad God had this kind of mercy for me, because I probably wouldn't be here today. And when you really think about yourself, you're like, I wouldn't be here either, right? So you can see the mercy in this. But either way, for any thief that was caught during the day, he was to compensate for the crime with his own money or be sold into slavery. Those of us who are not saved by Jesus are slaves in sin. We are dead in trespasses, slaves to sin. I used to be that, and the Lord saved me and brought me out of it. Now I'm a slave to Jesus Christ. I'm still a slave. You know, I'm my own man. I do what nobody owns me. Somebody owns you all the time. You're either slave to Satan or you're a slave to God. When you come to belief, you're just changing who you're slave to. You know, I love that. I had a professor tell me that. It was great. But you see, this guy here, he could compensate for his crime by being sold into slavery. You commit a crime, you're now in this bad slavery. So, you know, we know the wages of sin is death, and it produced a debt. When Jesus died on the cross, He paid for a debt. There's a lot of people out there today, they don't understand debt. They're drowning in debt. They got tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and I think if they don't understand debt here, they don't understand debt there. If you don't understand the problem of debt, you won't understand the need to be paying for debt. And so this guy who breaks in, he gets sold into slavery because of debt. We can see that here. Don't worry, I'm going to tie this all up at the end. I know we're like, okay, that sounds good, but let's just keep going. And y'all help me. Bear with me a minute here. Exodus 22 and 5. Oh, let me back up real quick. A little story I got. I had lunch with a friend of mine the other day. Y'all may have seen this in the newsletter. Had lunch with a friend of mine. Came outside, and outside of the restaurant, there was a homeless man sitting outside against the wall. And he goes, hey, could you help me? And of course, my first knee-jerk reaction was ignore him and keep walking. And I did. I kept walking. And I started thinking of those lyrics of a Don Francisco song. If you turned your head and pretended not to see, if you did it not to the least of these, you did it not to me. And I went, oh. And I'm like, yeah, and Ray, you're a pastor too. Come on. So it's like, I got to go back to this guy. Well, my buddy gets in his truck, and he's already in his truck thinking we're about to crank up and leave. Well, I turn around and go back to this man. And I kind of crouch down to him and introduce myself and get to talking with him. And I just went straight into it. And I said, hey, his name was Steve. I said, Steve, if you died today, where are you going? He goes, I'm going to heaven. And I said, well, if you went to heaven, why in the world would God ever let you in? And he told me what 99% of most Americans say. He said, because I'm a good person. I'm a good person. I'm so wonderful. And I looked at him, I said, well, you know what? I'm not a good person. And he just kind of went like that. Like, kind of like, I'm the homeless guy. You're the guy that just walked out of a restaurant and got in a pickup truck. You're not a good person. And I said, yeah, I'm not a good person. He's like, why? And I said, because I've sinned. And it produced a debt. It produced a debt that I can't pay for. That's why I need a Savior, Jesus Christ. And he interrupted me, and he stuck his finger right in my face. He goes, see, it's all your fault. And yelled at me. And I thought about it, and I said, he's right. And I said, yeah, you're right. It is all my fault. And I said, but your sins are all your fault too. And when I said that, he just went down like this. And he went like that. He buried his face in his hands. And I said, wait a minute, that's not it. There's better stuff. There's good stuff to this. And I told him about Jesus Christ, the Savior, who died and paid our way. And he listened, and he responded well to it. And I told him the gospel. And I gave him a tract, and I said, here, read this. And man, I felt good. And he felt good. Well, I went and got back in my truck, and my friend asked me, he said, Ray, I saw from my truck what went down. I couldn't hear what you said to him. But what in the world did you say to this guy that made it look so beautiful, what he did? And I said, what do you mean, what he did? He says, I saw him go from defeated to surprised to accusational to sad to happy in 45 seconds. Well, what did you say to him? I said, I told him the gospel of Jesus. He goes, I want to learn how to do that too, because I want to see something like that happen again. And I said, hey, I'll tell you how to do it. Let's get together and I'll do it. And for any one of you, if you don't know how to do it, come see me. I'll tell you how to do it. Scripturally, by the Bible, not by opinion, by the Bible. You have to give people the Word of God. And so I told him about debt. I told him about the debt that sin accrues and brings up, and the debt's too big. And so like we see here with this man, if he's caught doing the sin, and we all have been, right? We've all been caught. And we get sold into slavery, there's your debt. Okay? So anyway, I had to throw that in there. Exodus 22 and 5. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed, and lets loose his animal, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So back then there was what's called grazing rights, and today I think there's still grazing rights. We just surround our land with barbed wire, and your animals in there, that's their grazing rights. But they didn't have the fencing back then like we have now. And so people kept their flocks not only on good grass, but on their grass. It has to stay in my field. If my flock goes off and gnaws on the next guy's field, well, then that's hurting his animals, right? So if he destroyed another farmer's crops or land, he had to pay for it. You have to make restitution, cough it up, right? Had to pay. Again, What we see here is a set of rules in place for someone to make reparations for any damage that they cause. If you cause damage, there should be payment. Oh, I hear the gospel ringing in that. If there's damage, there has to be payment come up. And so also in fire, whoever started the fire had to make restitution. If it was animals or fire that consumed someone's field, whichever caused it, the people responsible had to make restitution. And we see that the Mosaic Code strongly affirmed the right to both life and property and payment for damages. Payment for damages. That's a key element here. Now, Exodus 22:7. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or of any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or driven away, and no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. Now, back then, there were no banks quite like what we have today, and so personal property was sometimes given to someone for protection. It's like, here's this animal, hold it for me for a time. And so the one who received someone's valuables, if they were goods, clothing, or animals, the person holding them for safekeeping was responsible for it. Even though it wasn't his, you're holding it, you're responsible. If any of these personal valuables were lost, and if no thief was found, do the math. Who do they think is going to be the one that caused the loss? The guy holding it, right? And so if no thief was found, then the one who kept the goods had to prove before judges that he didn't steal it, or else he had to make restitution. He had to pay for damages, paying double for what was lost. But if an animal in safekeeping was injured or lost, then the one taking care of it had to give evidence that he was not negligent, or else he had to pay for the loss. So what we're still seeing is damage and paying for damage. Whose fault is it? Is it whose fault? We'll take it to the judges. If it's this case, whoever's at fault has to pay, right? So obviously, in knowing all these guidelines for loss or damage, people obviously took extra measures in securing what they were holding. If you were holding something of mine, you'd want to make sure you had a really good, secure holding place, right? Got to be careful in how you're dealing. Keep it together. I mean, if like you're giving an animal to hold for someone. Let's say you were giving someone a loan and they gave you an animal to hold as, say, collateral. Or supposing you needed to borrow an ox, you had to till some land, and somebody had a good ox, he was good at tilling. Let me borrow your ox, I'm going to till my land for a while, and you're hanging on to this animal for your work, but it belonged to someone else, right? Knowing all these rules, would you not take extra care in making sure that those animals were protected, that they were taken care of? In my ranch days, we had a big, big barn, and we had big doors, and they had latches and locks and stuff. I mean, we were keeping people out. And when we had animals that we were keeping for a certain purpose, we put them in the barn, or we put them in the chute, or in a little corral or something. I mean, we protected our animals. We were really careful of it. And they really had to put up some work to keep these animals safe. One time we had a bull got out. He was bickering with a bull across the road. Didn't even belong to us. And I guess they were having a mooing match or something. They broke the fence and they were fighting in the road. Middle of the night, we got up and we got called by another farmer. We had to go out there and take care of the bulls, and we were trying to take care of our stuff, but you did the best you could to keep them secure. Because if you cause damage, or let's say a car come and hit one of them and now there's a death involved or injury, well, look what can happen, see? So all these rules were establishing grounds for damages to be paid if there was damage or loss. And the consequences that these rules brought on to the offenders would cause the would-be offenders to have a moment of pause. I'm thinking about stealing that ox over there. Wait a minute, if I do that, now you got to think about consequences. There's your deterrent. That's part of what the rules were here for. Not only to bring reparation for damage, but to stop the damage in the first place, right? It would cause people to think first, am I acting right or am I acting wrong? Because once I do what I think I'm going to do, it'll cause damage. I don't want to have to pay debts. That's kind of the point of it. Because the damages, the restitution exceeds greatly the cost of the original damage. Keep this in mind. Our sin that we did, the damage that it caused when Jesus paid for it greatly exceeded what we did originally. You ever try to think of if you could put a price tag, so to speak, on what it was Jesus did for us at the cross? You can't calculate it. We'll never know, probably, how big it was. And I'm talking just my sin alone, not to mention the whole sins of the whole world. Reparation for damages is huge beyond the original crime, right? So we see this about restitution. We're in Exodus 22 and 14 now, right? Yeah. And if a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it, not being with it, he shall surely make it good. If its owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So like we just covered, when an animal was borrowed, the borrower was responsible for its safety. If the owner was not present when the animal was injured or died, the borrower had to pay for the loss, which is why it says, he shall make it good. He shall make it good. It's the same as saying, make good on a deal. Make it good. And so if the animal is injured or dies, the borrower has to make good on the deal somehow. But if the owner of the animal was present, then the borrower was not held responsible for it. As it says, he shall not make it good. Now, if the owner is there with it, when the rented animal is injured or killed, then the owner's compensation was the rent money because they had been paid for its hire. It had already been paid for hire, so it's on the owner if he's there. Basically, what I see here is dealing with matters of responsibility. But to put it in, say, a modern kind of a perspective, because I had a hard time getting this together in my head. I guess I can see it like our children's ministry in here. All our kids just went in there, right? Our kids' ministers right now are in there taking care of your kids. They're your kids, and our ministers have possession of them. They're responsible for them right now. So if your kids do something, then our people, our ministry people, are responsible for them. But the moment you walk into that room where they are, then you automatically become responsible for them because they're yours and you're in the room. Right? So if you walk in there and your kid's running around like a tornado and my wife's in there going, what do I do? It's on you now because you just entered the room, okay? So I kind of see that here with, I'm not comparing your kids to animals. I'm just trying to come up with a modern way of putting it. And so, but that's going to present a unique point here in a moment. When you get in there, they're your responsibility because you are present. You are immediately responsible for being attentive to them if they're in your presence. So the next statutes deal with the seventh commandment in Exodus 22 and 16. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. Now, unmarried and unbetrothed daughters, it means they weren't engaged. A betrothal is kind of stronger than an engagement, but it's kind of similar. They were considered part of their father's property in that day. And so the loss of a daughter's virginity, if she lost her virginity, that decreased her value, that she could marry into another family. That's their culture. Now, if her virginity was decreased in that value, compensation was given to the father. Now, if someone seduced a girl who was betrothed or engaged, that meant she belonged to another man. That resulted in stoning both the man who seduced her and for the girl that gave in to it. And that is in Deuteronomy 22 and 23, if you want to look up a cross-reference to that, because they both went for it, right? But if a virgin who was not engaged to a man submitted to seduction, then the man was to pay the bride price and marry her. Now, normally the parents of a girl were paid a fee at the time of the betrothal, which ratified their engagement, that established that. In 1 Samuel 18:25, you may remember that Saul offered David his daughter, and David said, "Hey, I'm poor. I'm just a shepherd guy. I can't afford to pay this bride price." And so Saul said, "Well, I don't require a bride price, but instead go kill a bunch of Philistines for me instead. Let's just skip the bride price, go kill a bunch of Philistines." And Saul was trying to get David killed is what he was really doing. But David says, "I can't afford a bride price." So in the case of a man seducing a not engaged girl, if her father did not want her to marry him, then the man was still obligated to pay the bride price. I don't want you belonging with him, and you seduced her, and this went down, pay the bride price. See, this gets into serious matters here. Don't play around with this stuff, right? So let's move on. Exodus 22 and 18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Anybody like Harry Potter? Anyway, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. God's serious about this here. Well, that's not the God I know of. Welcome to the Bible. Let's move on. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry. And my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. Guys, this is God. This is God. He's protecting people. Oh, he sounds so angry. He's protecting people. He's protecting the weaker from the abusers, from the bullies. That's what this is. Here's the deterrent, right? Now let me say, anyone that was a sorcerer or sorceress, it was someone that dealt with chemicals and poisons. We have a word, pharmakia, which is where we get the word pharmacy. Basically, it's saying someone that does drugs. Someone doing drugs to mess your mind up. Drug dealers and people that knew how to concoct these things together. They were to be killed. Wow, America, hello. This is deep. This is very deep. The Israelites were not to mistreat or oppress strangers because they themselves were strangers when they were in Egypt. It's like, you didn't like it when you were mistreated. Don't go off and do the same thing to someone else. What you do to others could someday come back on you. So be good to people is what it's basically saying. Hey, the Bible says be nice. Did you know that? Because if you're not, it comes back on you many times over what you did. Oh, I don't want any more of that. I'm done. I'm saved by Jesus. I want to do right. So anyway, be good to people. You'll get back out what you put in, right? So also, they were not to take advantage of people without fathers or husbands because they were already without protection. In that day, orphans and widows, they had it really, really bad. It's hard enough now. Back then, the way their culture was set up, it was terrible for them. God is protecting. He's trying to protect the fatherless and those without husbands. Mistreatment of orphans and widows provokes God's anger. We should have great respect and honor for them. That's pure and undefiled religion, taking care of orphans and widows. So you can see God is trying to establish laws that not only prevents evil doing, but brings in reparations for the damage. This time we're dealing with people though. Exodus 22 and 25. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a money lender to him. You shall not charge him with interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. I love that. If you cry to the Lord, I don't know if God hears me or not. In matters like this, He hears, okay? And He's gracious. Foreigners were to be treated well because the Israelites themselves had been foreigners in Egypt. Now, God saw to it that loans were interest-free for Israelites. Hey, Israelites, got a deal for you. No interest on all loans. Wouldn't you love that? Let me get an interest-free loan and go get a house or a car or something. God's taking care of His people. He's trying to see to it that they flourish and they do well. So I'd love to have that kind of a privilege. If a loan was made, some valuable possession of the person, like a cloak, was given to the creditor as a pledge of repayment, his cloak had to be returned to him by sunset on this kind of matter, so that he could have comfort to sleep with. God is looking to it in matters of money. He's looking to it in matters of getting a good night's sleep. God's trying to look at everything for His people. He's really trying to provide for them. God also, what we see from this, God cares greatly for the underprivileged. The underprivileged and what we would say unfortunate. He cares for them, as He says in verse 27, I am gracious, which is also compassionate. And that's one of the big reasons that drove me to turn around and go back and talk to that man at the restaurant the other day. God cares for all these people. Exodus 22 and 28. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. And you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. You know, do not revile God or curse a ruler. Plenty of that goes on today. Plenty. I don't approve of things that the president is doing, but I'm not going to stand up here or stand in front of anybody and cut him down. I'm not going to do that. Why? The Lord tells me not to. Well, Ray, he's done that. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. It's not good. I guarantee you, somewhere at some point in my life, if you hang around me long enough, I'm going to do something, probably hope to God, unknowingly so. I may do something that will make you mad. I'm not going to try. But if I do, don't blast me with it. We're humans. We all do it, okay? So, a ruler. Don't do this with your ruler. And Anna brought up a good verse for me today in Ecclesiastes 10:20. Do not curse the king, even in your thought. Do not curse the rich, even in your bedroom. For a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. You know, you've heard people say, a little bird told me. How'd you know that little bird told me? I think this is where this came from. You know, a bird may carry it. Well, we know what that means. It means somebody picked it up and passed it along. And I think that's where the phrase comes from. We're not to be like them. God had just told people, you're going to be separate, you're going to be holy, you're going to be different. Don't go cutting down your rulers. You're not supposed to be like the world. You're supposed to be special to me. If we're going to be God's people and be holy, don't act like people out there. Let them do that. Let that be on them. We're not going to do like that. We need to be as God asks us to do. God is trying to get them to stop living like pagans. 400 years of slavery in Egypt in them. He's trying to get them out of that. Hey, we've been for many years in the United States of America that acts in a pagan way. We have to change ourselves from that too. Be holy. Let's be holy. That means set apart, right? They were not to live, the Israelites were not to live like the pagans did. They were to be different, special in service to God, giving the first sons, the first animals, special, holy, in service to God. And so, God outlined all these things now in addition to the 10 Commandments to keep the Israelites His own special people for Himself. And, you know, as we get ready to wrap up here, you know, we who believe in Messiah Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, if I got my guttural right, we who believe in Messiah Jesus, we are to be holy, set apart, different. You're going to get made fun of. You're going to be called a dork or a nerd, or people ain't going to like you so much. Well, you know what? I'd rather be friends with God before men. That's all I can say. And you know what? And if you want to be friends with me because I follow Jesus, you've got to follow Jesus to be friends with me. Pretty much. And if you don't, I'll still be your friend, but it'll soon rub off on you. But anyway, we're to be His representation. I am to be a representation of Jesus on earth. You are to be a representation of Jesus. To do that, you're going to have to look different. Very different. We're His representation. We represent King Jesus. Now, about transferability and responsibility and debt here. We saw a lot of this. You know, if you show up and that's your animal, you become responsibility, and it depends on what time of day and who's responsible and all this stuff. We've been all through that, all right? Let me tell you something. When I became a child of God, I suddenly came into His presence. When I became a child of God, so, you know, the Word of God says, those who believe in His name become a child of God. Everybody's not all children of God. You have to believe in Jesus. You become a child of God. And when you do, you come in His presence. Then I become His responsibility. Like saying, when you walk in there, now you're kids, that's your responsibility because now you're there with them. All right? So when I became a child of God, I became His responsibility. Therefore, the responsibility of my debt went to Him. See this from what all we learned? I got excited when I started seeing this. When I first, an ox kills somebody, and what am I going to get out of that? Well, here it is. This is getting good. I became His responsibility when I came into His presence, becoming His child. Therefore, my debt goes to Jesus. Damage was made by my sin. Like that man stuck his finger in my face. It's your fault. Yes, it is. But I can't pay for it. But now I come into the presence of God. My debt transfers to Him. And He will make good on it by making restitution. Restitution means the same as restoration. He will restore it. Psalm 23:3. He restores my soul. Wow, He restores my soul. Do you see that? He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. All this that we've read here in Exodus 22 talks about how to keep us from harm and how to make restitution, how to compensate, how to pay for damages that we did. When we fell into sin, and we all did it, that caused the damage. The great damage. And the damage was so much that we could not compensate for it on our own because the damage was done as death itself. How can you pay for something when you're dead? That's the damage. Wages of sin produces death. However, those of us who believe in Jesus, we are called, catch this, the bride of Christ. Oh. It's getting good. The bride of Christ. We are the bride of Christ. Those of us who believe in Him. Oh, bride price. It's like we read here in Exodus 22. If a man entices someone to be with him, come over here. Come over here. And if the father utterly refuses to let him go that way, to let her go that way, then a bride price must be paid. There was a time when Satan enticed me to be his. But my Father in heaven pursued me and drew me to His Son, Jesus Christ. God said, Ray, I utterly refuse to let you belong to Satan. Right? And so, who is going to pay for my bride price? I hear y'all saying, Jesus, and you're right. Jesus Christ paid the bride price. We're going to hear more about this when Dove gets here on June 10th. He's going to teach us detailed. I'm just touching on it. He's going to go deep on the bride price. So you want to be here for that. He has paid our bride price. And someday there's going to be a big wedding with a feast of the likes you've never seen. And it's going to be free of charge, and there will be a place at the table, at the wedding feast table for you. There will be a place for you right there. It's like those times I go to a wedding place and they have a little plate and there's your name with a little sign on it. Nobody else can sit there but you. You have your reservation. Isn't that cool? Jesus paid it all. He paid the bride price for us. He paid it all. All to Him I owe. Sin left a crimson stain and He washed it white as snow. And why in the world would God do all this for us? And I hear this all the time. This brings people to confusion. Why would He do all this? As He says in Exodus 22:27, I am gracious. God says, I am gracious. I just want to let you remember, I want you to remember, you are not worthless. You are priceless. Messiah Jesus died on the cross for you, to redeem you.